Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on a very special edition of Coffee with the Candidate. It still says start over here, so I'm not sure if it's actually started. Isn't that a shame? I should know how to do this on here. I'm going to hit start. Here we go. Stop streaming.
Maybe.
So maybe we've started. Let's see. We'll just do a quick check on our other Facebook page to see if it's going. And I apologize, everyone. This is still
the top of the screen. It looks like there's a few people joining in. So I think
awesome.
We're on.
Awesome. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Don. So what I will say here again is thank you all so much for joining us. We'll just start over from the beginning. We'll start fresh. For joining us for this open dialogue about race, Black Lives Matter, white privilege, allyship, and the path forward towards some type of healing. Thank you, Crystal. Today, I have with me Pastor Don Morrow, who is the senior pastor for First Christian Church and Waterway here in Northwest Arkansas. And we are here on this Tuesday evening this special Tuesday evening, because so much has happened in our world, in our current events, particularly as it relates to race relations, racism, criminal justice, criminal injustice, and so much of civil and civic unrest. At the same time, there's also been a special time of people coming together of all walks of life to join in this fight, to join in their common cause for elevating humanity and elevating justice. So I know that we are here primarily tonight because not just George Floyd, but because of George Floyd, because of Breonna Taylor, because of Ahmaud Arbery, because of countless others, we're at a point in our nation's history where now is a time where we are unabashedly faced with where we are with race relations and the recognition that we have to do better and things must change, and that we must create a path for that change. So Don, I know that in the community here in Northwest Arkansas, particularly in Fayetteville and across the country, there are memorial services, particularly for George Floyd right now. And so I think it'd be only fitting if we took the time just right now to just pause for a moment to honor his memory and to honor the memory of so many other lives that have been lost, taken due to police brutality, racism. We just pause for a moment here. So, Don, tell us all a little bit about your congregations, multiple, and here in Northwest Arkansas, and then we'll get into the discussion. And I want, before you do, I want people who are tuning in to know that this really is an open dialogue. We will be doing our very best to monitor the questions and answer them as they come in. Please type them in. We both want this to be a very open, engaging exchange of thoughts, ideas, even if you feel like it's not the popular one, we have to be able to put all of our ideas, all of our feelings, all of it on the table, because we won't be able to address it and move forward if we don't. If we're not honest about how we feel, if we're not honest about our perspectives, if we're not honest about where we want to see our individual relationships go and our country's relationship go. So, Don, tell us a little bit about your churches.
Well, first, thank you for having me as part of the conversation, Renetta. I feel honored that you asked me. And I am, as Renetta said, the pastor of First Christian Church in Waterway, which are both congregations in Bentonville. It's two locations of one congregation. First Christian Church is one of the oldest historical churches in Bentonville, and I've been the pastor there for almost 23 years. And I started when I was 6, in case you're wondering. And we started Waterway about 15 years ago, and we're part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ denomination, which is largely on the progressive end of the main line in churches. So we've been talking about race in our greater church for years, but it's certainly become more front and center in the last few years.
Yeah. So with it being front and center the last couple of years, I do know several members of your church, and I have to attest to the fact that it is probably one of the most diverse congregations that I've seen, particularly here in Northwest Arkansas. So there's a lot to be said for the type of culture and environment that you create within the congregation. And if you've been talking about race some over the last couple of years, what about these last few weeks? I know it can be a divisive topic. Have you approached this topic with your congregation?
Oh, yes. It's pretty much been the central focus of our worship services each of the last 2 Sundays. We've been worshiping. We have a drive-in worship service at the moment, and also do Facebook Live worship. And our messages and our pastoral prayers and our music has all been about reconciliation and peace, but not just wanting peace, but having to work for peace. So it's really been, and it is difficult. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a really important one that we have to be having. We should have been having it decades ago, but we have to come to terms with the violence that's being done, and sometimes being done in ways I think that aren't even intentional, but we have systemic ways of imposing violence on our Black and brown neighbors, and we have to come to terms with that and what we can do to change it.
I think the first thing, there are multiple studies out there, and so I am not the primary authority, but I do read a lot and I have experienced a lot. And one of the first steps towards any plan, any reconciliation, any solution is acknowledging the problem. You have to diagnose the problem. And America has a problem. America is going through a global health crisis through a pandemic. It's also going through a social health crisis, another, a racial pandemic that has, and I think, been exacerbated by the fact that, for the last 2.5, 3 months or so, depending on where you live, folks have been in the house. Folks have been sheltering in place. Folks have not had, the opportunities to be distracted, to go to t-ball and basketball and swim practice. And so I think that is one of the main reasons why the horrific murder of George Floyd captured so many people's attention. It was a flashpoint. Right. And I think back to the 60s, and you probably weren't even born yet, and I was just infant. But I do know that during the civil rights movement, that flashpoint, when people across the country saw hoses turned on children in Birmingham, my hometown, when they saw police dogs unleashed on children who were silently protesting, when they saw people sitting at lunch counters just sitting there silently protesting, silently advocating and demonstrating for their rights, that was the 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 injection, the catalyst for so many people across the country to say, hey, we've got to do something. That, that was great for then. Now we're at a similar crossroads. And I think being unable to be distracted by anything else is what caused such a reaction, such a just enough is enough. The pressure cooker was on, and the boiling point had been reached by not just African Americans, by not just Black people, by not just people of color.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that you've hit on it. The video, I think, would have been disturbing, and I hope would have been enough to bring us to this point, regardless of the surrounding circumstances. But the fact that we're in the midst of this pandemic has caused, I think that the word you use, distraction, is a key one there. I think too often we allow ourselves to get distracted from the big things, and this is a major part of our history. This didn't just happen. This has been happening.
It has been happening.
And I hope and pray that if we ever get back to normal, that it's a different normal than what we were in before, because normal is what got us here.
Yeah.
Normal
is abnormal. Normal is hideous. And the other thing about, and I've said this several times, the coronavirus and the pandemic didn't break our social systems. It exposed how broken our social systems already are.
Absolutely.
And that includes the social justice system. It includes race relations. It just shone such a huge, bright, unflinching light on where our country is as it relates to this topic. And we cannot look away. We cannot look away when we talk about the disparities in healthcare. We cannot look away when we talk about the disparities in education. We cannot look away when we talk about disparities in technology and all of these other systems. And we cannot look away when we're talking about race relations, where America is in relation to its treatment of Black individuals. We cannot go back to normal as we cannot.
No, I couldn't agree more. And it's a systemic issue. It's not the thing. I hope we don't, again, this can almost serve as a distraction, the whole bad apples approach, where we think it's just some individuals who are acting racist.
Mm-hmm.
While obviously that is a problem, there is a racism that is at the foundation of many of our system approaches to everything, from economics to policing to education to housing, and we have to first acknowledge that and then figure out what we can do to address it.
To address the systems. And you're absolutely right. I took a course not too long ago, which was eye-opening, from an organization called Racial Equity Institute. And I hope that is REI, Racial Equity Institute. And it outlined the country's history from start to now, and all of the racial implications, all of the systemic, all of the systems that were put in place, from economic, housing, all of them, banking, education, that had racial, not just implications, some were intentionally done because of race, to hold certain groups back: African Americans, Indians, Asians, Indians, Native Americans, Indigenous, and it just goes on and on. So we have to acknowledge that racism is not new in this country. This country was built on racism.
Absolutely.
And so you weren't here when this country was established. I wasn't here, so I can't hold you personally responsible for the creation of that system.
But
And
you can hold us, all of us should hold each other accountable and responsible for what we do going forward. Oh,
what we do going forward.
right. And
Absolutely.
and I don't think, that's where ignorance is no longer an excuse. There's the only way to be ignorant of the problem now is to be willfully ignorant of it.
Right.
And we just have to I pray we take this moment. We've had plenty of opportunities to have and plenty of moments in the past, but I pray that this is finally the one that galvanizes enough support and continual support so that when we do have all those distractions that are a part of our lives again, we remember how important this is for us to keep working on until we move forward. And I think it'll be a long process. It'll be a hard process, but we've got to engage the process.
So let me ask you then, as we're starting talking about just breaking down these systemic barriers and challenges and oppression, and we've got a movement called Black Lives Matter, and that apparently is extraordinarily divisive for some, for people of Black people to say our lives matter, and
Right.
and we want to be appreciated, loved, respected, and valued for existing. We don't have to be super Black people in order to be appreciated and loved. I don't have to be a superstar. Right. I don't have to be, Oprah Winfrey or Michelle Obama or any other phenomenal person. I just have to be me, and that should be enough to be respected. Why does that movement, why does that concept threaten or alienate or challenge people, individuals?
Well, sadly, I think it's because we are soaked in privilege. And so it is soaked in it to the degree that we don't recognize it. A lot of us. I mean, I have been in that camp myself, and there's still aspects where I have to peel back the layers myself and see things from a different perspective. But we get so defensive, a lot of us, when we have some of our preconceived notions challenged, that we don't allow them to be challenged. We just want to push back. And so I think part of it is that to hear that Black Lives Matter, the response from some is that all lives matter, but and of course all lives matter, but if Black lives don't matter, then all lives don't matter. So if you think all lives matter, then Black lives matter. So if you're, if one of my children is being attacked and hurt, the fact that I say this child means the world to me doesn't mean that my other children don't mean the world to me. It means that this one that's getting attacked deserves all of my attention and focus and heart and my effort to make things right for him or her. And so that's what I take the Black Lives Matter movement to be saying, is that we are not valuing some of our children right now. They're dying, literally dying at the hands at times of our authorities, and even when it's not that, dying because of the circumstances that the system's created. And we have to address that. If we want to love our neighbor, which in my religious world is the heart of what it means to follow Jesus, if you just want to be a good human, then we need to be reaching out, listening to those who are experiencing that oppression and violence, and asking ourselves what we can do to change the way that things are being done.
It's phenomenal when you think about the concept of just listening, and how in recognizing that focusing attention on one issue doesn't detract from attention on other issues. We can have marches. A young lady, Brittany Simmons Willis, made this analogy. This beautiful young woman, very smart, articulate, and well-spoken, and just a phenomenal person. Created share this analogy that we do walks for breast cancer, and we
Right.
do a heart association, and we talk about Alzheimer's association, and one doesn't detract from the other. We can
Right.
put a lot of focus and attention on breast cancer and the Susan G. Komen, uh, you know,
Right.
research. No one shows up at the Susan G. Komen uh, breast cancer walks saying all cancers matter, or
Right.
let's hear about lung cancer or whatever. So we have the ability and the capacity to do so. We have to be able to put that piece of that, like you said, defensiveness aside, and acknowledge that maybe you've been benefiting from a system that's been hurting someone else. Not maybe, but
Absolutely.
you have.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, gosh, I'm a straight white man. I've been benefiting from all sorts of systems all my life. And I think what gets people defensive is then that means, you're not as valuable, or you haven't earned what you've got. Um, and so people get on defensive, but we have to be able to move past that and just, again, at least start by acknowledging, yes, I have benefited. I don't necessarily have to feel guilty about that, because some of it is just
You had
the
no control over.
water we swim in, right?
Right.
But we have to acknowledge it if we ever want to change it.
Right.
And where then we can't, where we should feel guilty is if we keep denying that it exists.
Right.
Part of my white privilege is, at moments like this in the past, eventually, this is heavy stuff. I mean, I don't know about you, but these last couple of weeks, I'm just exhausted, like all the time. Because I can't stop thinking about it. I'm angry about it. It's hard to know sometimes the direction to go with all of those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so at times in the past when that's happened, I just get to the point where I turn off the news, I unplug, I just want to kind of heal and restore and get back to normal. But that is my white privilege. I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
There are people of color who just can't do it because it's not something they can unplug from. It's their everyday lived reality. And that's not true for me.
Yeah.
And that is what white privilege affords me.
Right. Well, I appreciate you even acknowledging that, because whether or not there is a victim of police violence and brutality, there are different existences that you and I, as we go through the world just on a daily basis. I was taking a walk to visit a friend, and walking through this neighborhood, and two separate women at two different times in the walk, as they were approaching me from afar, cross the sidewalk so that we would not have to cross each other on the same sidewalk, and would not even acknowledge that I was walking, and
Right.
I'm walking in the morning, good morning, and it would not even meet my eye. And that's nothing. That is, but I
Right.
tell you what, it got my juices flowing, and I was just thankful that I was listening to gospel music while I was walking, because the other part of me
Yeah.
wanted to just,
Yeah.
circle around and just let's have a conversation with why you just did that. But you're right. I think some people think that if they acknowledge that they are the beneficiary of privilege, then that means that they've done something wrong, or that they're not, not entitled to it, or heaven forbid, they're no more special than the next person.
Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, while they may not have created it, if you recognize that it exists, then let's see what we can do to make sure that other folks don't have to suffer. Not that you're going to get any less. And I think part of the challenge is, and it's not just with white privilege, it's just, even with the kids, or even in different circumstances, you think if I give you a compliment, or I share something nice with you, then that means I have less, or it means that I need to dim my shine, as we say, in order to shine a light on someone else. And it's just is No one's taking anything from you in order to make sure that other brothers and sisters have an equal opportunity. Does nothing takes nothing away from you, and kind of coming to that realization is going to be critical. How can we leverage your help in kind of sharing that message, Don?
Well, I think it begins by talking about it and acknowledging it. And it's something that we can't just let the moment pass and then wait until another moment appears, because you know the way the news cycle happens, something else is gonna happen anytime now that's gonna take our focus off of this if we allow it to.
This is true.
Um, and so I think it's incumbent on leaders of every level. So whether it's church leaders or community leaders like yourself, political leaders, or just leaders of households, or just leaders of friend groups, for us to keep the conversation front and center as much as we can until we begin to make actual progress. And it can't just stop on progress on the individual level. It has to be progress in policy making and policy changing and systemic changes that'll have lasting effects for our generation and our kids and our grandkids and all those to come. Or we are not currently living as the America that I was taught I was brought up in. It's
Have
just
we
not.
ever?
No, we
Have we
haven't.
ever?
No,
Okay.
but
Okay.
but
I just
that's
want to
what.
make sure. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. I grew up thinking that was the America I was in. I
Yeah.
wasn't. It was never that way. But it's time that we finally say that's not. That's actually not who we are,
Right.
because that we have not shown that that's who we are. If we want to be that, we've got to become that, and that means we've got work to do.
Yeah. I don't know if we've been the idealistic utopian that the founding. I mean, it was founded on. You know how the country was founded. It wasn't like it was an
Absolutely.
uninhabited land, and we just planted stakes here. I know how my people got here. So, in order for us to attain what's written on the paper as it relates to the Declaration of Independence and Statue of Liberty and all of those idealistic ideologies, we've got to make some changes, and it does start individually. Uh, but what I think is so interesting is we think about adults and what we can do at this area and community leaders. I'm finding so much energy and so much passion from the younger generation who are fearless
Absolutely.
in their passion as it relates to social justice. I know of young adults who are holding their parents accountable, black and white, for attitudes, statements, just commitment to realizing what this just nation is supposed to be like.
Absolutely. And I mean, that happens in my own household because of the coronavirus. My son, who's just finishing up his junior year in college, is home and has been for 3 months.
Yeah.
Um, and all the time, I try to be, I'm largely progressive. I try to stay very well read and informed, and he's calling me out all the time.
I know.
And just in the things that I don't think about, whether it's the language I use
Right.
or whatever it may be. And we need to listen to our kids because they see this, they haven't been as infected as most of us. I'm speaking for white people especially,
Mm-hmm.
have been by the history of swimming in these waters for so long that we don't recognize it. David Foster Wallace has this great story. It's simple. It's one that a lot of people have probably heard before, but it's about two young fish that are swimming in the sea, and this old fish that's coming up to them, and the older fish asks the two younger fish, how's the water? And the two younger fish kind of give him a sideways glance, and they keep walking or swimming. And then down the way a bit, they say, what's water? Because they don't yet recognize that they are in an environment And
Mhm.
flipping that, I think our younger generation recognize the environment more than us old fish that have
Mhm.
been in it so long that it's just so much a part of the way we've understood the world. We don't see that it's a lens through which we see the world. We think
Mhm.
it's the actual world, and
That's
it's
right.
not,
It's
just the
not.
way we've seen it.
And experience it. Just because it
Yeah,
hasn't
right,
happened to you doesn't mean it's not happening.
right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I had the quote. I'll find it and maybe repost it, but it went through a series of different social ills. And basically it said, just because it's not happening to you doesn't mean it's not happening. The world is larger
Right,
than just you or me. So we
right,
have to be, keeping that in mind is critical. Keeping that
right.
in mind
And
is critical.
that's where the listening becomes so crucial. I think sadly our Black and brown brothers and sisters have been saying this, shouting it, crying it for years, and
Mhm.
too many white people, especially people in power and authority, have explained it away, have said, no, you don't understand what you're experiencing, have
You
the
don't understand
audacity
your
to
pain.
say, you don't understand what's actually happening to you. And so some of the time, I should really listen to what I'm about to say. Some of the time, we just need to shut up and
Mhm.
listen and
Mhm.
then try to figure out what we need to do, because it's still incumbent
Mhm.
on those who are given that privilege and power to help break down, dismantle what's there so that we
To
can.
help to break it. I mean,
Right,
the
right,
majority created it. The majority has to dismantle it and break it down. Now,
right.
you don't have to do it alone.
No,
You're right, but listening is key, and it's hard to listen if we're defensive. It's
right,
hard to listen when we're uncomfortable. We don't like hearing things that don't make us feel good. And
right,
so often in our professional circles and our social circles, um, I'll speak for Black people. You can speak for, I won't speak for all Black people, but
right,
we would typically choose silence. We don't share everything that's happening or how we're actually feeling. We don't say that what you just did was a microaggression or it was racism. We push down, we tamp down, we hold it in, and we internalize. And I think people, and I know I am, that that's it's enough of that. It's enough of that.
right,
And to say you don't see color, and I know people are very well meaning when they say
right,
that, but my perspective is, how can you not? If you don't see me as a Black woman, then you don't see all of who I am. If I don't see you as a
right,
Caucasian male, I don't see you for all of who you are and
right.
everything that represents. Now, if I judge you differently because of that, then that's the problem. I don't have any
Absolutely.
problem with you recognizing who I am. I'm so proud of the melanin that I'm in, and it's just wonderful, and the heritage and culture and all of that. I wouldn't change it for the world. Wouldn't change it for the world. But I don't want you to be treating me or my daughters or my sons or my husband, my cousins, brothers and sisters differently, hated simply because of the color of my skin. Simply
Absolutely.
because
And
of
that
that.
and that that gets again back to the foundation of my faith and a lot of the world religions. We're all created in the image of God, so we all reflect that. Why would we deny any aspect of that and act as though that's just, it's somewhat of a distraction when we get into that color blindness, and frankly it's nonsense,
Yeah.
because we all do see it, or we're not seeing each other. We should value it. We should learn from that.
Hmm.
You bring something different to the conversation because of who you are, how you grew up, your background, your race. All of us do. And so
Yeah.
why would we deny any of that? We're all poorer for it if we deny it.
Right. I think it's so important. I've learned so much about different cultures and different people when you have a relationship with them and you're able to ask questions. And if you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And but when we can create an environment where we can have difficult, challenging, but really honest conversations without judgment, um, we grow from that. And folks will make mistakes. Well-meaning folks will make mistakes. I will make mistakes. I have made mistakes. Um, when you talk about your son, holding you accountable, my youngest daughter in particular really does. And so that's where grace comes in, right? When your heart is in the right place and you're learning and you're growing and developing, it's challenging. It's hard. But we don't get any place by staying quiet. We don't get any place by staying comfortable. You don't grow by being comfortable.
No, growth
I
is all,
have
the in the natural world, growth is all about being broken open. I mean, that's where when a
right.
seed is planted, it's got to go through trial and transformation before it can really grow. And I think we're all seeds in some respect, and
Mhm.
some of it's painful.
It
Um,
is. It's
and
disruptive.
right, but it's where growth is. Growth
Hmm.
always requires change,
Hmm.
and we have to be open to it and embrace it.
Right. I have a saying that I keep on my desk. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. That's where it
Yeah,
begins.
yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about about the current state, about just kind of dismantling some of the false ideals. And it was interesting you talked about the narrative that folks try to recreate when people want to express their pain and or are expressing their pain. And I saw a news clip just the other day where a government official said, but the football players had only said that they were
Right.
kneeling because of police brutality and not because of the flag, then we would have listened. And I just sat there in amazement because I know that's what they've always said. It
Right.
was never about the flag. So we have to be careful that the messages aren't diluted, the narrative isn't redrafted for something else because of people are afraid or
Right.
they're
No, I think it's largely fear. I think you're right. It's fear. It's fear of change. It's fear
mhm,
of, there's a fear of a loss of power. There's a fear of a loss of security in established authority, which is largely white.
mhm,
Um, and so I think that's where I think sometimes, not sometimes, often that fear gets played on. And so it's all about security. How are you going to
yeah,
stay safe from all the bad things that could happen to you and all the
mhm,
bad people that could do those bad things to
right.
you? And that just feeds into that racist structure that our society's been built on.
Yeah, it definitely does. And there are folks who know that and leverage that to the highest degree to
Right.
continue to to push their particular agenda. And I don't have the answer to that, other than just calling it what it is when I see it.
Yeah,
And I think it's the incumbent upon other people, particularly those in the majority, to call it out when they see it.
absolutely. And it's why I think, and speaking to someone who I hope and pray is going to be in government soon, um, I we cannot govern from a sense of fear. That
Right.
is destroying us. It's destroying the fabric of our communities.
Yeah.
It's it's why I think we see things like police in Bentonville, having my son got tear gassed on the square at a
Mhm.
at what was largely a peaceful protest.
Mhm.
And the reason that happens is we fear the other. And if
Mhm.
the other, it doesn't even matter if it's the color of your skin or your economic state or just the political position you take. We fear the other, and then we demonize them, and then we can justify doing whatever we want to do to maintain our place, the status quo. And that we have to get away from that. And I hope we can root fear out in some way from our governing authorities because it's just killing us.
You're absolutely right. Um, I wasn't there on that Monday, but I was there the following, I guess it was Sunday on Bentonville Square. And to see the diverse crowd and group of people still
Yeah.
peaceful uh, was heartwarming. So, in the same moment, or right after the same moment where there's so much despair and there's so much heartache, um, I was so uplifted. I was so encouraged. I was so empowered. I was just like, this is the ideal. This is what we are all, this is what we're striving for. And we can accomplish it one person at a time, one relationship at a time. People speaking up, people having courage to challenge and to, within their own sphere of influence, saying, that's not right. You shouldn't say that. Have you read this? Have
Hmm.
you Do you know about that? We have to educate ourselves, as you said. We have to be intentional about our relationships, about our words, about what we fill our brains and our hearts with.
Yeah. And we have to, so this is my challenge to you.
Okay.
once
Okay.
we once we finally elect people who say they stand for that, we have to hold them accountable to actually
Absolutely.
do it, to actually
Absolutely.
make those policy changes, because this
Absolutely.
isn't a Republican or Democrat thing.
Oh
They're
no.
both sides give lip service to this all
No.
the time and have been for decades, and we've gotten nowhere. I shouldn't say
Yeah.
nowhere, but we haven't gotten nearly far enough.
Yeah.
And that's true of both parties, and we have to hold our elected officials accountable.
That's right.
Um,
That's right. And I hope that someone was talking to me and I was telling them preparing for this and like, oh, you gotta talk about that. Don't say this or do say that. People might be turned off by you. And I said, if I'm in this race solely for this moment right now to have this conversation, then I will have accomplished my mission. And whether or not that means getting to Little Rock or not, because I know in my heart what I have to do and how I have to speak up for people, how I have to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, how to seek justice for those who are being oppressed, how to ensure that though the least among us has someone in their corner. I'm not saying that those who are wealthy that I'm not going to, of course we want
right.
to continue to prosper and grow, but we can do both. We don't have to prosper and grow at
At right,
at
the
the
expense.
expense of, on the backs of others. We've done that far too long. We can figure it out. We can do it better. So,
Amen. That'll preach.
and I hope to be able to do that in Little Rock. And yes, please do hold me accountable, because if there's ever a point where it seems, I wouldn't want to drift from that, because this means so much to me. Um, and so much to the reason why I'm in this race in the first place. So we talked about educating yourself a couple of times, and so um, what are some of the books that you've read or podcasts or things that you would recommend to others to get a greater sense of race in America, the history of race in America, white privilege, getting beyond that to allyship? What would you recommend?
Well, one book, I've got one here actually, that I really love is this book by James Cone. It's called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Um, and it's just some powerful stuff. What I would recommend, generally speaking, for is to read some Black authors so that
Mm-hmm.
we can again begin by listening rather than just making assumptions about the system that's experienced differently from by people of color
Right.
than by people who are white. Um, and and then in addition, I think, and this is hard to know the best way to do, but I think we have to cultivate the friendships and relationships that we have, interpersonal relationships, to have real face to face or
Yeah.
Zoom face to Zoom face
Yeah.
with people who will honestly tell us how it is and where we may be seeing it wrong, where that filter may be getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And that is uncomfortable, but we have to do that if we're going to make it a difference.
Yes, I agree. And I want to caution people when they are reaching out to people of color, and particularly Black people, to learn more, to educate themselves. Please, please, please take the initiative to obtain some information yourself. Do not
Don't
place
put
the
all of it
burden
yeah.
on the person of color, the Black person, to teach you everything about racism. Take the initiative, learn more, of course, have relationships, engage, have a personal experience, but don't expect them to be your tutor, your guide through.
Great point.
It's just not. It's just. First of all, we've done it. We've tried it. It doesn't work, and so the responsibility is where the responsibility is. So we're all in it together, but we've all got some work to do. So
Absolutely.
I would recommend a few books. I pulled a couple off when you pulled your book. I was like, where are mine? The Hate You Give. Outstanding book and film. It's too much. The Warmth of Other Suns. I've got White Fragility here, which talks about
That's great. That's really
that
good.
we talked about.
There's also a book that's, I think it's simply called Lynched. I was just trying to look it up, but
wow.
That is powerful in that respect.
Wow. If you've got Netflix and we're still under social distancing, 13th is a film to watch. American Son, When They See Us, The Hate You Give, of course, 12 Angry Men, so many others. I've got a list I can post in the comments here or later, just as resources. But quite frankly, if you open any of the online news sources, there's so much conversation and topics, so many resources available. All you have to do is just Google it, and you'll have a plethora of different types of media to help inform your opinion as it relates to race relations, privilege, dismantling systemic racism, allyship, and the road towards reconciliation and the path forward. Don, we have had a tremendous opportunity. Let me make sure I go through any questions. Jesse's putting the kiddos to bed. Thanks for spending some time with us, Jesse. Thank you, Kim. I think we've gotten most of the questions. Share the conversation. Taya asks, thank you for having these difficult conversations. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I did get one question I don't think we got a chance to answer, is how to define joy. You talked about the last couple of weeks being just really challenging. I speak for myself, and I know for so many others, the last couple of weeks were extraordinarily painful. The only way I was in tears or close to tears, quite frankly, for most of the last couple of weeks. And I did have I had people reach out and ask, very concerned friends, and I did the same as well. But working through that wasn't easy. And so
not to make this about church, but you ask about what we've done at church the last couple of weeks. And 2 weeks ago was Pentecost, and it's about the coming of the Spirit. And then we had already planned before all of this happened to have our series in June talk about the fruit of the Spirit. So if you're familiar with that, the fruit of the Spirit, Paul talks about our love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, generosity, faithfulness, and self-control. So we were going to go through each of those one by one, and joy is like the first thing on the list after love. And I had a hard time with it. because that was what we were going to talk about this past Sunday. We wound up talking about the next one, which is peace, because it spoke more to the moment. But I used to think about that as that's when you know you're living in the spirit, living out of the spirit, when you're feeling, you're experiencing all these things, when you're experiencing joy and peace and kindness and gentleness. But at least in this moment, I've started to think about that as, that you're living in the spirit when that's what you're creating, when that's what you're leaving in your wake. So even though right now I'm having a hard time finding my joy, what I want to do is work on creating life and the community in a world where joy is more the norm for my neighbors.
I love it. It doesn't erase the heartache and the pain, but what you leave behind is joy and peace and grace, and you leave it better than you found it. I think that is a tremendous goal and objective, and I feel personally convicted by that. I do, and I appreciate the reminder that that is our obligation, and so that's why we don't stay, the demonstrations and the civic unrest, peaceful, violent, the entire spectrum, it will pass. But what we leave behind and the work that must continue creates the joy, creates the peace, creates the grace, creates a better, more just world, a more just nation, at least starting. And we all have to start with ourselves, making that individual commitment. So I thank you so much, Don, Pastor Don, for your time here today. Thank you for ministering to me. Thank you for ministering to those who will see this video. And I thank each and every one of you for joining live and for who will see this broadcast later. Take a moment and do a self-inventory and be critical with yourself. What are some of the ways that you are contributing to the challenges that we've been talking about tonight? And what are some of the things that you can do differently? And that's each and every one. We all have a role to play. Some roles may have been, out marching with the signs. Some may be in advocating for a change in a nonprofit. Some may be advocating for change within your corporation. Some may be advocating for change in the legislature. So wherever you find your place, find it, dig into it, commit to it. We will all benefit from it. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you all so much for joining. I will post the list of resources that we discussed. I appreciate the opportunity to have this open dialogue, and thank you so much for your time. I'm wishing peace and blessings on each of you as we take this journey towards reconciliation.
Thank you, Renetta.
Thank you, John.